Welcome, everybody. My name is Dr. Sarmen Sarkissian. I'm on the board for the Armenian Medical Society, and I'm the chair of the Membership and Mentorship Committee. So a couple of months ago, we decided to start a video series, an interview series, where we really focus on our pre-health students and those in professional school who we're very proud of. It's a pretty large spectrum of students who are interviewing, kids who are in their undergraduate years, those who just finished, those who are just maybe fresh off an MCAT or a DAT, those who are in medical school. We even had Sophia, who literally just got into medical school, and we're going to have some residents and fellows in this series as well. We're very proud of our students, and we really want them to spend time and really reflect on their experience, give them a nice platform to share their experiences to others who are, their peers and future colleagues, and, be able to express them in a lot of detail. So today I'm lucky enough to have Mary Keushkerian here. Mary, you want to introduce yourself before we get on with the interview?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction about this program. I think it's a great opportunity. So my name is Mary Keushkerian. I am a recent graduate of UCLA. My major was psychobiology, and I was very active within leadership at UCLA. I was the president of the Armenian Students Association, and that's how I got to know Dr. Sarkissian.
Very good, thank you. And we've done a lot of projects together, and we're really happy to have been able to collaborate with Mary when she was the head of ASA. So speaking of UCLA, how did you end up there? How did you pick UCLA from, some of the options you had available?
I honestly chose UCLA because of its proximity to home. I mainly made my decision literally when I was 10 years old. I went and I visited the campus and I fell in love with it. I saw the dynamic of the students, I saw all the opportunities. I went during the enormous activities fair and I saw the breadth of clubs at UCLA and I was immediately drawn to the environment. And as I was deciding between my schools, I read about all the research opportunities and the volunteering opportunities. So that just solidified my decision to go to UCLA. And then on top of it being, 45 minutes, an hour away from home was just another big plus.
Yeah. Did you feel like UCLA gave a good balance of, intense academics and a good social environment? And was it a good experience overall?
Oh yeah, I loved UCLA. I'm so sad that I graduated. And even though I technically had 3 years there because my first year was online due to COVID, I've met some of the most amazing people ever. And I've met some of my lifelong friends and solidified relationships with my peers. And I'm so grateful for all the opportunities UCLA gave me and, all the friendships.
Very good. So when you were there, I mean, how did you pick a major? I mean, UCLA has so many excellent departments. I was a chemistry major there, but, I'm obviously not as familiar with the other majors there.
So that's actually a funny story. I got into UCLA with chemistry. Always loved chemistry, and I was like, that's it, that's gonna be my major. Then I read about the upper division courses, and I didn't know if I could balance that and the pre-med courses because they didn't all align together, and I knew I would have to take some extra courses, and maybe some schools didn't accept some of the courses, so it was just too much of a headache for me. And I learned about MCDB, which is molecular cell developmental biology. I was MCDB for a bit, then I didn't like the emphasis on cellular components. I kind of wanted something more integrative with the body and the mind because I think we all know the effects of stress on our physical health, the toll of our mental health on, you know, our disease progression and all of that. So I ended up choosing psychobiology, which is it's a very good mix of biology and psychology, and it was the best decision I made. I love the major. The courses were fantastic. I got so much experience, in research and also in learning about neuroscience, which I didn't even know was, a thing at the time when I was a freshman. So it was a really good major. I'm very happy with my decision to do psychobio.
So, given that you were majoring in psychobiology, I'm assuming psychiatry and neurology are those things that interest you. Do you see yourself going into that field in the future?
That's a really difficult question that you're asking me because every time I shadow a physician or I work in an office, I'm dead set on that. I work in a cardiology research lab, and I'm like, that's it. Cardiology is my passion. I'm going to do cardiology. But then I saw a C-section and I was like, maybe I want to go into OB-GYN. So anytime I see a procedure or I see, a new field of medicine, I'm immediately drawn to it. And I think that's partly because of the innovation in medicine, and at the same time, just a curiosity, like what does this field have to offer and what can I offer it?
Yeah. So, you have an interesting background because your father is a physician. Has there been any sway to sort of pick his profession or just being a physician in general, or do you felt like you really had a clean, unbiased approach?
So my father's a surgeon and my mother's an internal medicine physician. And being their daughter, I've always seen the dedication and the time that being a physician takes. My father always, he can come home at 2 a.m., then I'll wake up to his pager at 4 a.m. because there's an emergency surgery. Or during the height of the pandemic, people would call my mom at 3 a.m. because they just got COVID and they have shortness of breath. And so I've seen the time that it takes and the dedication to your patients, no matter how tired you are, where you are, what you're doing. And I'm lucky enough that my parents never pressured me to go into medicine. They always let me make the decision by myself. Um, but seeing it from all these different perspectives, from their perspective, from my perspective as a child and as a pre-med student, it just solidified my decision to be a doctor. I cannot see myself doing anything else.
Yeah. So you felt like UCLA was a really good environment to nurture that desire for medicine?
Oh yeah, I genuinely think it was academically vigorous. It wasn't an easy college to go to, but at the same time, the opportunities were right there. I could walk 2 minutes from campus and be at Ronald Reagan. I could be anywhere that I needed to get the volunteering or the shadowing or anything that, I wanted to build on my resume or that I felt was lacking in mine.
So speaking of your resume, we were able to glance at it. We're really proud of how well you did on on your classes. You had a very high GPA. You were able to do research. Let's start with the research component. How much research did you do total? And, what are some tips you have for getting into a research lab, whether it's a wet lab, a dry lab, and publishing?
So I would say I've done around 1,400 hours of research. I would say 800 hours are in psychology and 600 hours are in cardiology. And so for me, I think it's important to be persistent. I think a lot of PIs really like persistent students, and they always get very impressive CVs, and they always get, students with a 4.0 and have cured cancer and have these crazy accomplishments. But does that necessarily translate to someone you can rely on in your lab? Not necessarily. And I think PIs really look for someone that's very passionate, very driven, and will contribute to their lab. I never took no for an answer. If it was a lab I was very, very interested in, I would send follow-up emails. I would, request meetings. I would do whatever I needed to do to get my name in the pile, to get the research that I wanted. Because I tell like some of the students I mentor this, that if you really like something, you're never going to get that satisfaction from doing something else because you got to know. If you get a no, go to the next person or ask, what can I do to improve? Or ask, why? Like, why didn't I get it? Why can't I be a part of your lab? I can contribute, X hours during the summer and X hours during the year. And I have this quality that I feel like will contribute to your lab immensely. So always just advocating for yourself, and just if you like something, just keep going at it. The worst is gonna happen is that they're gonna say no, but at least you know that you tried and you got what you wanted, or you were steered in the direction of getting something even better. Because to me, everything happens for a reason.
Very good. And then when it came time to publish, how did you go about it? Because I think sometimes students feel shy or timid about approaching their PI. And, obviously, you need all the currency you can on your resume to, to be competitive at the end of the day. I mean, as much as we love, the passion, I mean, it does translate to, quantifiable tokens on your resume. Any tips on how you got published? Did it just organically happen, or did you kind of have to push for it?
So I've had a lot of posters. For the posters, I literally would find a convention and I'd be like, this is what I want to apply to. I want to do it on the study I'm working on and do this, this, and this. And I want to work with the other undergrads, and it would work. So I think I have like 3 or 4 national or international posters. But in terms of publications, I'm in the process of getting published. Um, and I really think it's very hard to tell someone I want to publish this or I want to be on your paper. But at the end of the day, my mom always says this to me. She goes, "Chulatsog erechain katavok chika." Like if you don't ask for it, you're not going to receive it. So it's very uncomfortable, but I think that's something in medicine that you're always going to be put in uncomfortable positions and you just kind of have to advocate for yourself. And so, for example, I would do data analysis for just so we can see if our project is working. And then I asked one of my supervisors and I was like, hey, I know you're working on this paper. I think my data would be helpful. Can I help or can I contribute? Or if there was another paper that I heard about, I had the skills in the data analysis and I would say, I know the data analysis takes long, but I'm willing to stay extra and do it. So I think it just really depends on how you make yourself look, like what can you contribute. It all goes back to that because I really don't think any PI doesn't want to see their students succeed. I think every single PI really wants to support it. But at the same time, I think it's also up to you to kind of push for it and advocate for yourself. And also just really think about it. Will you have the time to contribute? Because, posters are just as good in the AMCAS application. It's like poster/publication. So it's just thinking about what you want and seeing if you really have the time to dedicate for time to dedicate for it. But at the same time, just advocate for yourself because a lot of the times if you ask, they'll probably say yes. And if they say no, you'll probably, find a way for another paper with the lab. Just show you're interested.
Yeah, I do really like your proactive approach. And how many PIs did you work for too?
Too. So I stayed with my psych PI since my freshman year. And then my cardiology PI since April of last year, I believe.
Very good. So, you did really well as far as research. Any tips on, how you essentially ended up with a nearly a perfect GPA? Were you more of a daily studier, or did you have any cramming tips? Maybe a combination of both?
I think it depended on the class. Some classes like OChem, oh my goodness, OChem. I think so many people can relate to this. I would study every single day after class, but I wasn't like one of those gunners that would study for hours after class. I would just read over my notes and call it a day because I had other classes to worry about. But when it came to the exam, I would say around like a week or so before the exam, I would really, really discipline myself to do all the practice problems. So I would look for old exams that the professor shared. I would look for practice problems from the book and just really, really practice. And I think that's something that helped me in all my classes, especially the math heavy ones, because practice makes perfect. I know that's so cliche, but it becomes kind of like second nature at some point. When you look at, I can't even make an example because I forgot it all. But when you look at an example, you're like, oh, I've seen this pattern before in one of the problems I did. And it feels so good to just write it out. And if you can't figure it out, that's okay. My tip for exams always is never leave anything blank. Even if you have no idea what you're writing about or what you're supposed to do, just write something. Don't give the opportunity to get a zero. Just write as much as you can. Try to solve the problem as much as you can because the worst feeling is always leaving the exam and being like, oh my goodness, I remember that question. I know how to do it now. But at least you got partial credit. So I think just being proactive in your studying, you don't have to kill yourself studying 24/7. I know that's very untraditional of me to say, but I think the best time to study is during class. Put the phone away, put your iPad on do not disturb, and really try to absorb the information. If you can't figure it out, go up to the professor and ask and say, I didn't understand slide 5. Can you please explain it? It not only shows your professor that you're interested in the class, but you also immediately get the answer back. So you don't go home, watch YouTube videos, confuse yourself more, and just go into this like, dark, deep, dark hole. But also at the same time, it shows your professor your face. So that's a really, really good opportunity to get your letters of rec too. The letters of rec I got were in the classes I struggled the most and went to all the office hours because I genuinely just didn't understand what was going on. And I was really struggling with understanding equations and the relationship to real life and just always being proactive in everything. And asking questions and going over your notes is the best tactic to me.
Yeah, I think the vibe I get from you, Mary, is that you're just very present. I think you're present in your lab, present in your classes, and it really comes out. It exudes yourself in a nice way. And I think for some of the students that are going to enter a pre-health or a health profession, a lot of healthcare professions, whether it's dentistry, pharmacy, speech pathology, psychology, medical school, it's a living, breathing creature. I mean, if you really want to be I think a shy introvert and really work on long-term projects, it's going to be challenging being in healthcare. Like, I think Mary's attitude is kind of what you really need toward a lot of things. And I'm curious, how did you bring this attitude to the MCAT?
Oh, the MCAT. I wasn't always like this. I wasn't always so proactive and, advocating for myself. It definitely came with experience, with leadership experience. But with the MCAT, there is no holding back with this exam. I really struggled with it because, my grandmother passed away right before my exam, and there were so many moving parts to this exam. And I think a big part of it is also just the fact that, oh my God, this exam is literally going to dictate if I'm applying this cycle. And I think when I successfully took my exam, my mentality was whatever is going to happen is going to happen. I tried to block out all the noise. And if I was stuck on a question or something, I would immediately go to a YouTube video or ask Reddit and like all this stuff that had the resources or look in my books. I also really, really, really had no shame in asking people for help. And I think that's something a lot of us struggle with because I think it's always very hard to ask for help. Even if you're raising your hand in class, it's hard. But I had absolutely no shame in it. I asked so many medical students and people that I know who did well on the MCAT about their tips because they're the ones who've been through it. They're the ones that were able to overcome this beast of an exam. And um just asking for help and not being stuck on one question really, really helped me. I think it was just trying to be as stress-free as possible during this exam. In the end, helps you so much more than being neurotic and studying 24/7.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I do highly recommend early planning. I do
Yeah.
recommend, I wouldn't wait until the last minute to open up your first MCAT passage. The classes I'm a large fan of because unless you're just naturally good at these things, it's nice to learn a few tips from the people that are just good at these and end up being lecturers in these classes. And even if it's just half an hour or 1 hour a week, a year or two in advance, just to get a feel for how these passages are written, because it is very different than taking an OChem exam or general chemistry or physics. They're just written a different way. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be such a heavy weight on your shoulders initially, just a little, even if you do an hour a week, for a year before you actually start studying, well, you know what, that's 50 hours of, exposure your mind slowly got to, you know, it's like a preview of of what's to come. So, I mean, coming back to your undergrad experience, you picked a major you loved. It really opened up a lot of research opportunities because it seems like you loved it. You did very well as far as GPA. You did well on the MCAT. You were able to publish. How did you also, end up in leadership positions? Is that something you sought out day one, or did it sort of dawn upon you later on?
Yeah, I want to say one thing about the MCAT that you said. The practice problems are so important, and I did Swartwood testing, and I really liked their content. And I so agree with planning early. I That's how what I meant by not studying 24/7. It's because I started studying 6 months before my exam, and it was so helpful where I didn't have to study 12 hours a day in 3 months. I was able to study, some days 5 hours a day. And then if I had the bandwidth, I would study 10 hours a day. There were always difficult days like that, but the studying in advance is such a good piece of advice. That was so good. Also leadership. Yes, I've always looked out for leadership since day one. I think I was in the leadership position of like 6 clubs. But I really, really focused on two of them, which was the Armenian Students Association and the American Cancer Society. I first joined the Armenian Students Association purely because I joined during COVID. I had no friends at UCLA, and I really wanted to find friends and go through the process of, pre-med at UCLA together until my best friend and my sister joined. And it was really, really, really beneficial, not only in saying, oh, I've been a part of the executive board of this organization, but it's actually implementing the change that you want to see in these communities. So, for example, with ASA, I really wanted to advocate for my community beyond fundraising. I wanted to implement longitudinal change that can support not only the local community at UCLA, but also other marginalized communities, other oppressed communities, and, Armenia at large. Um, I was able to lead 2 resolutions in the presentation to the Undergraduate Students Association Council at UCLA that passed unanimously. I was able to create more institutionalized events for ASA that were catered to mentorship beyond AAMS. It was completely sponsored by the transfer student representative. And it's been such an honor being a voice for my community that often feels so silenced because of everything going on in Artsakh and Armenia. It's so difficult to just it's so difficult to raise your voice and feel like there's no community, no one backing you up. But that's the beauty of ASA. It was that this was a community of people who are going to back you up and are going to be the change that we want to see in the future. Whether it was through vigils where we had literally people from all over California to come, when we had Coachella and other cultural showcases, fundraising so much money and bringing in so many people, is just such a great opportunity to see the power of our organization and being able to expand its reach beyond UCLA, because then we were on KCAL 9 News, and then we were interviewed by Good Morning UCLA, and it was just a really good opportunity to not only learn how to speak in public and advocate for my community in public, but also just for personal growth in knowing how I can implement change in my community.
Absolutely. And something like the ASA is so valuable because, you are going to spend the vast majority of your time, in school identifying as a student and later in your career and family. But, the ASA is just about as raw and natural as it gets as an organization because it's not leveraged toward any financial outcomes. It's not part of your professional career. It's such a defining feature of what it means to be human. What's your ethnic background? What's your cultural background? And, an organization like that for our marginalized group is so powerful. And what I loved what you said about you approached it from an institutional perspective. It's one thing to be a spectator or a guest with these organizations and things are just sort of happening in the background. But once you enter backstage and you look at the mechanics, you're like, okay, well, there's bylaws and rules, and as challenging as it is to be on a board and have to agree and disagree on things, but the power is once it's institutionalized, like you said, for example, the mentorship events we're doing with AMS, well, now that's kind of like part of your bylaws and agenda. Now it sort of has to be done, and it's not left to chance or whoever the next set of board members is. Once it's sort of baked into that cake, it's part of the structure. And I know it sounds really boring and mechanical, But when you look at the benefit ASA is going to offer for the next generation of students for the next 10 years, with these events being held, 3 times a year, for the next 10 years, there's sort of this natural exposure that's guaranteed, especially for the new class that's coming, really valuable for our community. So we are running out of time at this point. A couple of closing remarks. I know whenever we spoke earlier, you said, obviously, you're extremely successful, but like everyone else, you always face roadblocks or obstacles. You mentioned to me that there's a quote you always tell yourself to power through these events. What is that quote? Do you want to share it?
Yeah, it's actually my lock screen right here. It's a quote from the Bible. It's "Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." I live by that quote because there's been so many obstacles where I was like, I don't know if I want to be, a doctor, or I don't know if I can do the MCAT or take OChem. And there were so many times where I really doubted myself. But this quote really made me realize, like, maybe I don't understand it now, but a year from now, I'll understand. And now, as a senior who graduated and, is on this next chapter, I'm really grateful for this quote because now I see why that happened, why that roadblock happened.
Yeah, and it's inevitable. In healthcare, you're going to be coming across really tough situations. I mean, it could be anything, a dentist missing an oral cancer. It could be pharmacists dispensing wrong medication, a physician having to have tough conversations about hospice transition, or you just name it. And, it's a living, breathing creature. You could work 24/7, 365 in healthcare. The mankind's healthcare needs never end. And physicians get burned out, dentists get burned out, pharmacists get burned out. It's a never-ending amount of work. Your skill sets always need improvement. The knowledge base has to grow, and it's everyone trying to offer perfection, but at the expense of, us getting exhausted and trying to keep up with the beast. So the beast you mentioned will surface its head many more times in different ways. And I think these little quotes, like you mentioned, help you take a breather and realign your spiritual axis.
Yeah.
So very good. So Mary, it's been a true pleasure and an honor to have you on. You really hope this video offers more inspiration to everybody that's going to be watching it. And again, we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, it's been an honor. Bye bye.